All right, welcome back, everyone. Thanks so much for taking a few minutes to chat in those small groups. Hopefully you were able to meet someone that you did not know previously today. I am here to introduce the topic and introduce our speaker, and then I will let her take over. So as I imagine many of you know, Empower Missouri has been holding these monthly Friday forums for decades and decades and decades. Before COVID, these monthly meetings were always in person. We had meetings in Kansas City and in St. Louis, some in central Missouri, Jefferson City as well. When COVID hit, we shifted to a statewide online Friday forum. And most of the forums in the past have been education-based, really talking about a specific issue or a bill, a legislative priority that Empower Missouri focuses on. This one's going to be a little bit different today, that we're not going to be educating you on a specific issue, but we're hoping to teach you a practical skill that you'll able to put into your toolbox of advocacy, as I call it. Sarah actually brought this tool of the message boxes to our organization earlier. And I know for me personally, it was really helpful to kind of lay out my talking points and my arguments for the issues that I work on. And I'm hoping that this skill building that Sarah is going to lead us in today will be as helpful to each of you in your organization and in your advocacy work. So Sarah is our policy and advocacy manager here at Empower Missouri. She's been with us for, I think, over 4 years now. She also is currently leading all of our affordable housing work. But a shameless plug, we're actually looking to hire someone to take over our Affordable Housing Coalition work. So if you know someone that might be interested, just reach out to me or to Sarah, and we will be happy to follow up. Sarah also has her master's in social work from the University of Kansas. So Sarah, go ahead and feel free and take it away.
Christine, that was so formal and great. Thank you very, very much. I appreciate it. Christine and I have worked together for a very long time, so it's fun to put her on the spot and make her do an introduction for an organization that I lead at, and most of you already know me, so that was just a fun challenge for us. So Nashel, if you'll flip through, we're going to talk about message boxes today. I think the next one maybe will be, yeah. So often when I say, like, let's fill out a message box around something, people will ask me, what are message boxes? And I regularly share, like, the biggest challenge in a campaign for change is often messaging. I have seen really effective messaging change an entire room, which in my experience has both been good and bad for me. And so I feel really strongly about making sure that we identify messages that work and we can communicate those in a way to make sure that we are being as effective as possible in sharing those messages out. Another time, we can talk about how to get to those messages that work, how you identify those, how you can combine messaging with storytelling and media training to really get the most bang for your buck with your messaging. Mainly, the biggest key is always just remember you don't have to actually answer the question that they asked. Your biggest role is to reinforce the messaging of the campaign and get them back to the answer that you want them to hear. But for today, I'm going to share a little bit about a tool I really like when messaging is established, when you know the words that you want your message carriers to use. This is a good way for people to get on the same page with messages that work and to keep them there consistently saying the same thing. In my experience, often we will choose messengers based on the experiences that they already bring to the table. It's really easy to do that. It's easy for us to look at folks who are used to being kind of in the room, used to offering testimony or driving change. However, I think we do a really significant disservice when we do that. It's really clear that people of color, people with low incomes, people who are less politically connected, those who have not been in the room before, those who have lived experience, those folks are much better message carriers than I will be, or many of the folks that I regularly see in Jeff City. We also have some real ethical implications when we are not regularly expanding the table of advocates. Effective messaging is key to systems change. Consistently using the language that we know can change minds is one of the biggest tools that we have to win these campaigns. In addition, We really want to be sure to constantly solidify the folks who we believe are already with us. We want to encourage them into action. We want to keep them on board. We want to help rally them every time we interact with those folks. That's difficult for new message carriers. It's difficult for people who are established in the messaging. Messaging can be tricky even when we're not talking about providing testimony in front of a body of elected officials. Messaging in town halls or community meetings, those grassroots activities are really important to how we share our messaging. But again, like, it can be scary, it can be intimidating. This is especially true when our message carriers don't know how to anticipate the counter messaging that they're likely to face. What kind of pushback are they probably going to get in a space? Or when message carriers haven't really been trained. And so we just sort of like send them out and we say, like, you know, hammer down on this point. They don't know how to pivot back from the counter messaging to the messages that we know will work. Those things feel scary and intimidating. And so we are always looking at Empower Missouri for ways to keep people consistently in the same messages that we know are going to work. So message boxes are a very clear way to communicate our messaging to allies and to partners. They are really not designed to be shared publicly. They are designed to quickly get a lot of people informed on the topic. It helps prepare those newer advocates and helps us keep focused those advocates who've been in the field for a long time to what currently the campaign is saying. They are especially useful in coalition work, which is most of what Empower Missouri does. So we find them very helpful around here. Some training is usually required, but oftentimes folks catch on pretty quickly when you hand them a message box. You say, like, here are the points we want you to hit, and here's what you're likely to hear from other folks. They're really good for visual learners, as well as those who learn through reading. And some can be built, you know, much more thoroughly than what I'm going to show you today, but some of them, but often I think that the language is the best when it can really be boiled down to the most relevant information. It's the easiest for us to remember. It's the easiest for us to communicate out. They also allow our organizers a chance to really simplify and streamline the messaging while allowing us to really cater it to the audience. And so sometimes it can be, you know, something that was really difficult for me to explain or for our message carriers to explain before can really be boiled down into message boxes in a way that's really easy for us to get folks on board with. So I think there's another slide here. Yeah, so this is a blank series of message boxes, which seems really simple when you look at it. But we're going to walk through like how we fill this out, what it's going to look like when we're done. So the first thing that we, you know, it's like set up in these quadrants, which is very easy for us to kind of get on board with and understand kind of what we're doing. So if you'll flip over to the next one there. Good. So it might be sort of easy for you to figure out, but if it's not, when we build our message boxes, when we talk about the us, those are the folks who generally are probably likely to agree with whatever message that we're trying to share. And then they may also be like sort of receptive to the idea, but not really built in or, you know, deeply invested. And they could be really invested. It could literally be the people in that room right now. So when we consider who is the kind of opposition, who are the counter message carriers, who are the folks who are not likely to be with us, we sort of lump them into them. Sometimes this is really difficult for folks like me and others who are social workers who like don't want to categorize people right off the bat, but this is important for us to understand sort of an idea of who we are likely to encounter and what we are likely to experience with them. So the first step as we begin to fill out these message boxes is to really consider what works and why it works. So when you have polling to support these choices, that's fantastic, but we often do not. Instead, we kind of lean on the experience of each other. We lean on the experience of folks who have been doing this work for a long time. All of that's great. Usually there's some sort of balance between both of those things. But just having an idea about what are the messages that work, and why and how they work is really great. So I think if you flip to the next slide, there we go. So we're going to start to build these boxes out. And in a little bit, I sort of built an argument to build some fake messaging around. I know for the last 18 months or so, we've all been working from home, or many of us have been working from home. So something silly that I chose was kind of the importance of having natural light inside someone's home. In addition, it's like an actual thing. There's data that show that low-income housing is less likely to have natural light, less likely to have energy efficient windows. So it's, really a true thing that we're talking about. So as we consider who is us and who is them, and we need to think about like, what does the us mean, and what are the messages we're trying to share? So for today, we're going to imagine that this is a coalition. Our forum today is a coalition, and we are funded by a grant that is focused on health equity. So we're going to use health-focused messaging for this campaign. Then we're going to think about where it works. If people can't see the connection between health and housing, they're not likely to respond to messaging about housing being life-saving, right? So that's really an us to us message. That's something we know. We know housing is life-saving, but I can't quite get you to like, housing is healthcare and housing can save people's lives if you're not sort of already there. So if you're not on board already with the idea that natural light inside your home is important, you're probably not likely to connect with an equity value or us talking about health equity. So that's important for us in the room to know as we begin to build a health-centered argument and about how we'll get to folks. However, we do know that lots of people connect with a fiscal argument, right? Especially in most of our jobs. It costs less money to use less energy, so that might be something that we can get some buy-in from, and basically anybody who's ever paid a utility bill will understand that that's true. The hardest part of building the message boxes is almost always going to be when you're starting with the them sections, especially that them to them. So what do folks who disagree with what we're trying to do, what do they say to each other? It makes us feel kind of like icky to validate those talking points, even if it is so that we can dispute them, to write them down, to give them some validity. But it's really a critically important part of building this tool effectively, and is the reason why you can't often just hand message boxes to people who've never seen them before. You have to walk them through what exactly the message box says, so that we can see how those boxes interact with each other later on. Because we're really going to take all of the them to them statements and answer it somewhere else, right, in the us to them. And if we don't really have a thorough understanding of the words that they use to each other, we can't really start to respond to them appropriately. In addition, there's a value statement under all of our messaging, right? All of our messaging, like I was talking about, maybe we're going to talk about health equity, maybe we're going to talk about fiscal responsibility, whatever it is, there's a value statement underneath the messaging. And so it's important for us to understand what the words each other are, so that we can get to what is the value that's underneath there that we can answer in another way. So when we talk about us messaging about equity, that's a direct response maybe to a personal accountability message from the them to them box. I think that there's a filled out. I think this is probably the right time to switch to that. Good. So as we filled out the them to them, we can talk about, we anticipate that they talk to each other about people with higher incomes just have nicer homes. And if people want a different type of living environment for themselves, they should move to a nicer home, right? We hear that kind of messaging a lot. That's that personal responsibility equity. But then we can talk about, we can answer that a little bit more with like, actually natural light will reduce energy costs for everyone and it helps them to save money. And so that's a worthwhile thing for us to think about in lower cost housing. That top box, the us to us, that's an equity argument, right? For us, we want to talk about how natural light is really popular in higher cost housing, and lower cost housing often has less. And meanwhile, natural light has all sorts of positive health outcomes, reduces stress and depression, it boosts your immune system. There's good reason why everybody should have natural light in their home, and why that's an equity issue. Then we can talk to a little bit about like, what are they likely to say to us and how do we answer that again? So we anticipate that their counter messaging is going to say to us, right? They may not say directly to us in a space like, well, those folks should just move. Sometimes they might, but often they don't. Often that's something they say to themselves. Instead, they'll say to us, just put more light bulbs inside your house, right? Just like have more artificial light, and that will achieve the same outcome that you're talking about, right? We have electricity, just use electricity. But we can see how those things really are counter to each other, right? Use more electricity is going to cost more money. That's going to prevent folks from being able to save money to be able to move if they choose to do so. And we wouldn't be able to necessarily make those connections on the fly unless we anticipated that when they say to us, just use more artificial light, what they really mean is you should save up and move to a nicer home if you want more windows. And so that's where it's really helpful for us to really understand what are the counter messages likely to be and what are the values statement that are underneath there. So as we filled this out, right, our us messaging about equity is a direct response to their personal accountability messaging in the them to them box. And if I didn't know it was coming, or if I didn't know that that was likely to be underneath whatever they actually say, I can't get there and neither can they. And so we're not likely to turn anybody who might sort of relate to that them to them statement. There is, limits to personal accountability when one doesn't have an option to use a window or something else for natural light. We can get there if we understand what they're trying to tell us. If I can understand what the value statement is underneath what their message actually is. And if I just get mad, like if I just get frustrated because they're telling me people should just move and they don't understand the whole system and the context of how difficult that really is, I can't really answer their messaging correctly, and I can't get to the values that exist underneath that messaging correctly. Like I said, that those them messages are really the hardest part of building out these boxes, and something that even internally at Empower Missouri, we often struggle with. But there's huge payout to doing that level of work and understanding where folks are coming from. I went off notes, which is not surprising to anyone who knows me. So give me just a second to figure out again where I am. Yeah, so again, as we like kind of break down the boxes, that us to us is really the messaging that we know is likely to sort of galvanize and move people into action, the people who are likely to connect with the messaging we were going to share anyway. Us to them is the messaging that we think can sway folks who are kind of on the fence or a little bit with them. How are we going to really talk to them and answer their values that are underneath the messaging that they're likely to use? And the same is on the other side. Them to them is the stuff that they will use to galvanize their base, to turn their networks into action. And usually that them to us section is like a little cleaner and kinder, but often underneath we'll find the same values that we found before. So this is like a really short and simple set of message boxes, which is really common. They are most effective when those messages are boiled down to the shortest, snappiest answers you can get to. There are, spaces where it's appropriate to build out bigger message boxes around very large campaigns. But often I tend to lean towards, like, if there's lots of various aspects, I would rather have various message boxes that relate to that campaign. Even when we built here at Empower Missouri, we put together message boxes as a staff to really make sure that our staff was all on board with the same messaging around our coalition issues. We took criminal justice reform, which is a huge issue, and really put it down into like 5 or fewer points in each of these boxes, so that we can really get to the like concise, short, correct answers that we know are likely to turn people, we know are likely to educate people. Again, what I like about the shorter boxes too, is the idea that when you are in a press interview or you are giving testimony and people are asking you questions, you can very quickly get back to the messaging, rather than try to understand like the nuances of the questions you were asked. You can know what the values are that are likely to be underneath that and pull the messaging very quickly that really is going to address that issue, right? So if somebody says to me like, yeah, but haven't you heard of light bulbs before? I can know that what they're really trying to get at is a personal accountability message, and that the way that we can talk about that then is the idea about, equity, and talk to them about how, maybe this is a room that I think will particularly respond to an environmental conversation, right? All of that uses electricity. Or this is a room that I think will respond to a fiscal responsibility message, like, yes, but light bulbs cost money. And good energy efficient windows are one way to help reduce the cost burden onto households with low incomes that you've already identified, right? You already identified these households are lower income. How do we help them save money so that they can make different choices in their life if they want to? So I have sort of a imaginary interaction that I use often when I provide these trainings to organizations. And so let's imagine that, and I'm just going to pick like kind of the first 2 people that are on my screen here, which are Elizabeth and Rita. So let's imagine that I really want to talk to my friend Elizabeth. I know a little bit about Elizabeth. I know that they are sort of very interested in equity arguments, and I know that they are a person who really loves growing plants inside, which are imaginary things I'm totally imagining, right? But I can imagine that I know this about them. So we think that it's likely that Elizabeth is going to be on board with us as we talk about having lots of natural light indoors and the importance of that. So when I'm talking to Elizabeth, I might start by talking about the connections between natural light and health equity, because I know equity is an argument that's going to work with them. I might talk to them about the links between rampant capitalism and housing and natural light. And then I could sort of rile them up into taking some sort of action with me. But then I want to go and talk to Rita, who I know may not be as open to that argument, right? Maybe I know that Rita is connected to energy barons in Missouri, right? And twists her mustache every day or something, right? So we don't know a lot about Rita, but we think that it's likely that they're not with us. So our message boxes can tell us a little bit more about the things that Rita might share with us and what are the value statements that are underneath so that we can really answer that. And maybe Elizabeth and I can start to think about a plan because Elizabeth is really connected to health benefits. Maybe that's what they're going to take. They're going to take the health benefit argument. And then I'm going to talk about housing costs and the experience of people who struggle to pay for their basic needs. And as we try to really have a conversation with Rita, either in a public forum of some sort or just privately, right? Because the message boxes are they're very adaptable. I don't need to change what's on the box. I just change how I interact with it and how I share those messages. So we can anticipate the kind of things that Rita might have heard about natural light inside homes. We might be able to talk about how, light bulbs are great. We're glad to have them, and they certainly mean we can read before bed at night, but it's not really a replacement for having natural light, which also offers warmth in the wintertime and connections, health connections and things to really be, even healthier, more productive members of society. something that we know Rita is likely to want, because it's really not that, Rita just wants more people to use more electricity. It's that Rita really wants people to be members of our community. We just have a different idea about how that might show up. So we might not be able to convince, right, Rita today, but we can know, Elizabeth and I can know a little bit about the messages that Rita responded to, and the values that Rita shared with us during that time. So we can connect with her again at a later time. Yeah, I think there's one more slide possibly. Let's see here. Yeah. So I'm nearly done with the portion of today that is just me talking at you, and hopeful that you all have some questions to ask here at the end, especially because in true my own fashion, I spoke very quickly. So what I had timed out to last, 40 minutes or so is going to be 10 minutes shorter than that. Just a reminder, again, we really keep these message boxes internal. They're not designed to be published like on a website for obvious reasons. We don't want to give a lot of insight into our own messaging strategy, and we also don't need kind of the counter message carriers to really be able to look at it and have an idea about that very quickly. We did our homework to identify them messaging, and we want them to do their homework to identify our messaging too, if they're going to be able to do that. There's also just like not a lot of context. And so providing them to the general public without explanation and filling in some of that hidden nuance is really only going to harm the campaign that we're trying to do. Again, remembering that they can be short or lengthier. Some people really like to build them with lots of links and data, and that's great. It's particularly good to put data in there when that's the data we want uplifted in our messaging. If we know XYZ is popular with voters, we want folks to know that. So we're going to make sure that it's somewhere in our us messaging that this issue is popular with voters. Fight the urge to really answer the us messaging or the them messaging in those us to us and them to them sides. And again, just a final plug that really considering that them messaging is going to pay off in the long run. We're going to really have a better understanding of the values statements that are underneath that messaging and our ability to answer that. I have for sure seen good message boxes. My very first campaign that I ran here in Kansas City, I was at a town hall meeting with my message boxes, and I basically said something along the lines of, if a landlord in Kansas City doesn't want to provide running water for their renters, I don't really want them to landlords in Kansas City, which I knew was going to be a very frustrating message for the person who was sharing the stage with me. And I was correct. She went off on sort of like a 5 or 6 minute rant about how I had no understanding of the housing market and how there would be no quality rental housing anymore. And then I was able to really just like cede my time because I had done exactly what I knew that would happen, right? Because I understood their messaging, and I understood that the way for us to them to communicate is to really share that like actually basic needs should be important to the landlords in our communities. And that was all I needed to share, right? That was the value I needed that room to hear. And I knew that the folks who were sharing the stage with me were unlikely to sort of let that sit. So using effective messaging can really be a game changer in a room like that, as well as when we're interacting with the press or interacting with the public. This is really helpful tools. These message boxes are really helpful tools to really train your social media staff on and help them understand why we really want to focus on the us messaging. The us to us messaging is really what we should be sharing publicly, but that us to them is what we really need to have prepared for us to answer different questions that we're likely to get that are really going to come from that them to us box. Really it's just a helpful way for everybody to get right on board with each other and use the same words consistently, the same messages consistently, which is how we win campaigns, which is how we win big systems change, by making sure that we're really intentional about the things we say and to whom we say it. So I think that's it, my official presentation here. And I am really happy to answer any questions now that folks might have, either by coming off of mute or by putting it into the chat box there. And one thing you should know about me is I have 4 children and I will just sit here in silence. So if you have a question that you're unsure about asking, please absolutely do speak up. Shelby put in the chat box any tips for groups working together to combine their messaging. Absolutely. One of the things that I really like about message boxes too is that we can really build specific ones for specific things. So if you have a coalition of folks and there's a group of them that are health equity focused, and there's a group of them that are energy focused, and there's a group of them that are basic human needs focused, you could build message boxes with the same types of messaging, but different nuances for each of those groups. You also sort of can plug in lots of things there and work together to narrow them down into the messages that you think are going to be most effective for your campaign. It's really common when you're running like a very large campaign with lots of moving parts to have several different sets of message boxes, so that people can really customize the words that they're going to say to specific groups, and understand how they're likely to be received. I think often getting everybody onto the same messaging is some of the hardest part of coalition work. And maybe I'm a little bit different as an organizer in that I really don't think that we need to necessarily always use the exact same words. I think that that value statement is the thing that's really most important for us to consider. What are the values that we're trying to share with our messaging, and what are the values that we need to answer to? And so often, even if you're using slightly tailored messaging to different audiences, as long as you're sticking to those same messages that work, or those messages that really effectively get to the campaign, I think you're good to go. You're set on that aspect of your work. Michelle, advice for finding them messages if us and them have similar values as a whole, but maybe you disagree on one specific issue. Yeah, that's a very good question. Often the them messages are going to come from reading the information that they're providing to their network, as well as a little bit of just experience, right? Folks who have been doing this work for a long time, people who are living these issues, they know what the counter messaging is because it's what they get told at the grocery store as they try to use their SNAP cards, right? They are intimately connected. And so that finding and identifying like what is the them message is really important. I think often the easiest to win campaigns are those that really have the same values underneath. And so in the example we were talking about before, it's really easy to say like, well, both sides are trying to make a fiscal argument. And that's probably valid. But there's, nuances to that fiscal argument of like, who should be ultimately responsible for energy efficiency? Should it be, the community as we build building codes, or should it be, the individual as they choose the place where they live? And if it's the individual, how much option are we providing to those folks? And so often we can connect on those value statements of personal responsibility, and really get to, certainly we see a lot that personal responsibility is misunderstood sometimes by the them message carriers, because if we're, hundreds of thousands of units short in the state of Missouri, people with low incomes are not really choosing the places that they live. They're kind of like just jumping on the first thing that they can find, and doing their best to hold on to it. And so sharing some of that information with folks so that they can understand the context of the argument that they're making is really, I think, helpful to kind of flesh out and make them challenge their own thinking. And there are always going to be interactions that all of us have that are very frustrating because these folks don't really, maybe they don't want to challenge their own thinking and really consider why they believe something to be true. That kind of is what it is in our line of work. But our job is always to just keep presenting to them, that challenge. Why do you think that? What makes you believe X, Y, or Z? And providing to them the information that they need to really understand the whole context of the issue whenever they're ready to. Hopefully that helped to answer your question, Michelle. I'm not sure, but. Yeah, Shelby, I'm happy to share out the kind of blank template. I'll tell you that I just basically rebuild it every single time that I have to in Google Slides or Docs or whatever else, because it really is just those kind of 4 quadrants. But I'm really happy to share a blank one with you if you'll shoot me an email, because I will not remember, as everybody who's interacted with me in the last 6 months knows. But yeah, I would be really happy to send you something.
Also, I guess to put Sarah on the spot, if more people want a template, I will be sending out a follow-up email to this session. That email will have a video recording of this, and I can just throw in a link or throw in an attachment with this template so that anyone can use it. You can refer back to the follow-up email if you're like, oh, what did a message box look like? You can find it in that email.
Oh yeah, that'd be perfect, Nichelle. Thank you so much for reminding that. These message boxes are really like old school organizing tools that have just really been effective, proven effective in policy change and legislative and systems change. So I am always really happy to like bring more and more of them. In no way do I ever want you to believe that I made them up, because they are definitely the hard work of organizers, mostly organizers of color who've been doing this work for decades. And they always seem to know how to do it best. So happy to have that and to share those tools with you all as we deepen our level of work together.
Does anyone have any final questions for Sarah? Did you see that, Sarah?
I did not see it. Here, let me pop this out. Sorry about that.
It's okay.
No, I'm really sorry. I do not know the original organizers who are responsible for creating this tool. It was part of what we learned at the University of Kansas in our policy class. The professor there was very consistent about using these kind of old school organizing tools. But Kate, I would be happy that I have the textbook back here where I originally learned it, and I will see if there's some sort of citation about it that I would really love to pass on. Thank you for that question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great idea, Kate. Thanks for bringing that up. Wonderful. Well, thank you, Sarah, so much. I do have a few quick announcements and some dates that I want to throw out there. If Nichelle, you want to move to the next slide. I think Sarah said that she has those dates on there. Yes. So As you may or may not know, Empower Missouri is the convener of 3 different coalitions. We've been meeting with those coalitions approximately once a month. During legislative session, which is January through May, we will increase the meetings of those coalitions just so we can stay abreast of what's happening in Jefferson City. But each one of our coalitions will be meeting sometime in the first couple weeks of December. You can find the information on our website about how to register for those calls. I know you have to register for the food security one. I'm not sure if they have it set up the same way for the other 2, but the dates are on there. The last date on there is for a town hall, which is going to be similar to a forum. It will be an opportunity to learn a little bit more about the Clean Slate initiative that we are partaking in here for the next few years. We're going to be doing some real advocacy to work on automatic expungement, ways to clean the records of individuals, to help them better obtain employment and jobs and housing. We have been doing a lot of that work with our Criminal Justice Coalition in the past, but this is going to be a real push, a real organized push to do some of that work. So December 13th, we will have Senator Brian Williams on the call with, in addition to a few other speakers that are going to be talking about that issue. So please look up on our website, which is empowermissouri.org, to get all of the details about registering for that event as well. Am I missing any other announcements, Sarah, that you can think of?
I did put the link in the chat there for all of our coalitions so that you can sign up for a coalition. You also will be able to sign up for their just general mailing list there, which we would love to have you, especially as we get more and more into the legislative session and begin doing a lot of things. I did also want to call out that the Build Back Better bill is moving forward and passed the House this morning. And what a great thing that will be for the state of Missouri.
I don't have any other announcements or any other notes. Sarah,
I think
Mallory?
we're going to give everybody, I think we're going to give folks 10 minutes back in their day. Thank you. Thank you all for joining us today. My email address is sarah@empowermissouri.org. Please reach out if you have any more questions or thoughts, or if you'd like to bring this or other types of trainings to your organization. We would love to talk with you about what that could look like.
Have a wonderful Thanksgiving holiday if we don't talk with you before then, and have a wonderful afternoon.
Thanks, everybody.
Christine,
Thanks.
good seeing you.
Hi, Barb. Good to see you.
You can't
Or at
see
least,
me.
or at least the bee.
Yeah, I'm hiding.
I understand. I thought Fridays were your day off. Weren't you gonna kind of lay low
they
on
are,
those
but
days? Yeah.
they are, but I can't miss this meeting because this meeting is all about my work, so I have to